My current role is Pro Vice-Chancellor at the University of Lincoln, which involves running the College of Business. The university is divided into 4 colleges, so it's my honour to be running the College of Business, and I've been doing that for just under 3 years now, and that is, I think, about my 9th or 10th career. So in my last job, I was doing a role for Laureate Online Education. So I was Chief Academic Officer for the UK, which involved providing the academic delivery and supports for all of our online programs with the University of Liverpool and the University of Roehampton. So I think it's at its peak in around 2011, we had just around 10,000 students on online programs. And I was looking after around 400 faculty who were really all over the world. So, and prior to that, I've been in various roles in academia and industry. So initiatives and challenges. So I think the initiatives, I mean, I had the pleasure when I arrived of really creating the new college from the beginning. It was a new college for the university when I took over. So I was able to put in place a new structure and strategy for the College of Business here. And so 3 years has been really a construction building process, transformational progress, a change process, and also one of diversification. So at Lincoln we have a very beautiful campus here, right in the centre of the city. But because it's in the centre of the city, it does put some limitations on our physical growth. So part of our initiative, which is often the case, has been led by the College of Business, is to diversify as well as grow. As any regular business, we continue to grow. We've been very successful at that. The University of Lincoln is doing extremely well in the UK rankings, and as a new university especially. And what we're now doing is diversifying. So we will always have as our core business the teaching of undergraduates face-to-face, our 3-year undergraduate programs, which we do very well, and all of our rankings show that. We're very close to the top of the country, 7th in the UK on student satisfaction for undergraduate teaching. So we know that we're good at doing that. What we're increasingly doing, though, is looking at diversifying, which means that we don't have to have students physically present here on campus to be able to teach them. So it's not new. We have, for several years, run distance learning programs, which I think, Divyanshu, you might use the term sort of online 1.0, if you like. So we've got a lot of experience and expertise in technology-enhanced learning already. And what we're now doing is looking at expanding that in various ways. It's not our only diversification plans, but a significant one is to plan for and to bring in fully online programs, which of course allow us to grow and to scale without people having to be physically present, and allow us to extend what we believe to be a fantastic educational model that we have here in Lincoln to anyone in the world. And that's a very big part now of what we're up to. I think the challenge, it's a very interesting, and as a bit of a student of organizations myself, the very interesting challenge that brings. Like any organization which has a core business and a core operating model that generates its revenue, whether you're building cars or whether you're producing petrol, whatever it is, you've got an operating model that relies on consistency of delivery, on maximizing your the quality of what you're doing, and a university in many respects is no different, and that's our core business. What the organization challenge is when you bring an innovation in, is how you incorporate that innovation such that it doesn't damage or risk your main business. And that's a very interesting challenge, and Clayton Christensen's work deals with this very well. So he talks about the flywheel of your business. So my biggest challenge has been, and still is actually, to work out how we're successful at diversifying our business streams, to use business language, whilst making sure that the main business that we run in our undergraduate and to some extent our postgraduate teaching continues to thrive. So that's a very interesting strategic organizational capability challenge as well. So in terms of, so your first question is about how we're going about doing that, right? So what are just to dig into that challenge a little bit more.
Yeah.
So how are we going about doing that? Well, I think the first part of it is very much a change management process. So that's making sure that for people who it's not just a business school project, it's a university project. So we're bringing in online programs. It's a strategic objective for the university, fully supported by my boss, the Vice-Chancellor. So my first job really has been, over the last few months, a change management project. And that means a sort of hearts and minds thing. So letting people know what it's about, why we're doing it, how it's going to affect them, giving them an opportunity to share their concerns, because particularly for people who are very busy doing our current work, looking at a big project like this, it looks like something which is new and more work for them. So part of this is to understand why we're doing it as a university and what the importance of it is, and allow people to share their concerns about that. And there's been a lot of work going on over that period with particular central service units in the university, with my own faculty. And that's continuing, actually. It's a very interesting piece of work that's really important in a big project like that, to make sure that you don't just land this on people without all of that preparation work, because it simply doesn't function in that way. The second thing then is to work on how I set up a structure that will manage this. And my intention is and has been to create what I call an innovation hub in the business school, which is slightly separate from our main job of running and teaching faculty, teaching face-to-face students. And that will retain as a separate function, at least for the time being, such that they can operate outside, and this is the other key challenge, outside the university structures, processes that run the other part of the business, because those processes aren't appropriate for this type of education. And so what I need to be able to do is to make sure that the new unit retains independence for the length of time that the university can accommodate it in its regular business. Because if I don't do that, then it will be strangled by the work that the university does, which is not appropriate for that part of the business. So all of our processes for managing undergraduates don't really fit to that part of the business. It's also a very different skill for faculty to teach online from teaching face-to-face. So it also allows me to bring in faculty, train them, and develop them in the skill of teaching online in a separate business to the main part of what I do. At some point in the future, I may well then choose to integrate that into the main part of what we do. But for the moment, I need to keep it separate. So that's the second thing that I'm doing. And then the third thing that I'm doing is that I've chosen to work with a partner to deliver this. And this partly links, to Vianshu, to your second question. I've chosen to work with a partner who will bring a particular capability to Lincoln that we don't have here, or that we have some skill in, but we don't have a strategic capability in. And that is international marketing and recruitment. I guess that's two capabilities. So the partner is going to bring that work in to me. I'm going to add that to the capability of the university, and that will allow us to scale relatively quickly, and to put those key tasks in the hands of somebody who I know is already good at it and can deliver it. And I think that's coming back to your first question about my experience, or your second question about my experience at Laureate, because I've been in that position. So I was, if you like, I was in the other side of the equation. So on the one hand, that means I know where the bodies are buried. I know how the OPMs, the online program managers, function. I know how they generate success, how they generate revenue. So that's been quite a healthy discussion, because they know that I have that experience. And now I'm on the university side of the picture. It works that I can understand that from both sides of the argument. And it also means that I'm establishing, for me, what is a true partnership. It's not a supplier relationship, it's a long-term partnership of equals, where we both get value from the partnership. And most of all, we work on a common vision, which is providing an excellent education to a whole new generation of students using the Lincoln experience. So that experience, so my previous experience, I think, has been very useful to be able to try and set that up in the right sort of way, such that the partnership then runs well from the beginning. When I was in Laureate, we went through many stages of evolution in our partnerships with UK universities. We encountered many difficulties in those relationships. So I understand what those difficulties are. And I think it allows me to try and deal with those at the outset rather than encountering them when the partnership is already running, if that makes sense. So I think the reasons why students drop out from online programs, at least the sort of online programs that I want to run, sort of master's level, working professional, those sorts of online programs, and different students have different perspectives and different reasons for dropping out, but that's my target audience. So I think the reasons why they drop out and why they retain are now quite well understood. There's a lot of experience now in how that works. So I think part of the answer to your question is to come into this project with a very clear idea or a very clear task as part of the project, to maximize the success of our students on the online programs. Because it's not about dropout, per se, that's one function of it. It's about their success. It's about making sure that they graduate with a really good degree from this university. So it's getting to the end of that program, which is a retention question, not a dropout question. It's a retention and academic quality question, if you like. So we're starting the project with a very clear, sort of perspective that's an essential criterion for the success of this partnership. There are then a number of steps or actions or tasks and structures that one puts in place. You mentioned pedagogy. That's absolutely one of them. So a key criterion for me in terms of the way that you design that online experience is a social criterion. We know that students will drop out because they feel isolated often. So we need to make sure that the pedagogy designs in a social aspect to that they're put into an environment where they feel part of a cohort, for example. A second aspect of that is individual attention, so that the students feel like at any time they're getting individual attention, both from faculty and also any support services that they have available to them. A third part of it is that we know that a lot of the risk of students attriting or dropping out is in the first or second module. So a lot of attention to their early experiences in the online program, because by the time they've got through to the first or second module, they understand the pattern, they've got used to the rhythm of learning, they've got used to the idea of learning online, they know what the time commitment is, they've got more increased commitment to the program itself. We know that by and large, everything else being equal, they will tend to stay with you at that point. So it's a lot of effort in the design of those initial modules, through the increased attention they're paid, through some really good induction into the online experience, through making sure their expectations are managed carefully in the enrollment process, so that they know really well at that stage what it is that they're letting themselves in for, such that if they decide that it is not for them, they're provided really good information. If it's not for them, because it is a massive commitment, then they make the right decision. And that right decision is either to join it because they feel they can do it, or not to join us because they feel they can't. So I think that's also a big part of that effort to make sure that they get to the end of their program. But I have to say that with our combined experience, I mean, Lincoln are really, really good at the student experience. We now, and it's a very interesting task for us, is to take that face-to-face experience and create a different but equally good and equally high quality experience in the online classroom. And actually, we're right in that phase right now. We're right in the middle of designing that at the moment. It's a really interesting task for anybody who's interested in online learning and teaching students. I suppose the first thing to say about it is that students will study these online programs for all sorts of different motivations. One of the great advantages, of course, of fully online programs, particularly at master's level, is that if you are, as you say, Divyanshu, if your main motivation is in career transition, it allows you to do that without having to leave your job to do it, right? So if you take a full 2 years or 1 year to study full time, inevitably that forces a career transition on you, because you have to quit your job under most circumstances to be able to do that. So it allows them to gain a really good degree whilst staying in employment. And it was one of the characteristics I always remember from my last job, that in a global downturn, it was often online. There was often an upturn in online programs because people were unwilling to take the risk of quitting their job to go and do a full-time program, and they saw online as a very good option for doing that. So certainly online, I think, is a very neat way for people to be able to achieve both, which is to think about a career transition without necessarily having to take the risk of quitting a job to be able to do that. And that experience, and I remember this all the time from my last job, one of the bits I used to love, and I still do actually, is going to graduation when I used to be able to speak to the online students, often meet them for the first time, of course, and just realize how transformative their education had been for them, and in all kinds of ways, often personal. Often they go through a really deep thought process about what they want out of their careers and their lives as a result of studying online. Sometimes it is a very classic, I got a promotion as a result of getting my degree. But actually that's only one of the motivations. Often it's about their ability to think very differently, to think more broadly, about their current role. Often it's about taking on a slightly different role as a result of their education that they've done. It's often about being able to improving how they manage a team, develop more strategic thinking. There are all sorts of skill or competence-based advantages they get from studying an online program, as well as, of course, the thing on the CV, which says you have a good degree from a university, which in and of itself is a massive advantage for any working professional these days. I suppose the first thing is to have a strategy. I don't think the universities are notorious at being able to do a good job at analysing both competitive marketplace and also the demand from global markets. And so that, I refer back to my previous comment about finding a partner who can do that for us. No matter how universities try to do that, I don't know of many. If you think about how many universities there are in the world, I think it's probably a very small subset of universities who really do get global marketing, being able to analyze those marketplaces and identify products and services that meet that global market. And of course, we are talking about a very a kind of a very large and growing market, potentially limitless, actually, to all intents and purposes, which is the growing middle class around the world, and the demand for education is enormous in that growing middle class. But it's also there may be a lot of providers entering that space, but my question is, how many of them do it well? How many of them do the right sort of analysis of that market, such that they really do target their products to identify the people that they need on their programs? How many of them have the right quality offering to be able to deliver that? And I know just from my own networks that there are a lot of universities in the UK, just in the UK, working with or trying to work with OPMs to do this. Look at how many have actually achieved it. It's actually a very small number who've actually managed it. And that's because, quite frankly, I think a lot of them simply don't know how to go about doing this. So I think there is an opportunity still to get it right. I think it's a very big market, so there's a slice of that market available if you do get it right. And for a university that has a high quality offering and puts students first anyway, and treats this as a long-term deal, I think there's plenty to go around. Well, I suppose you could compare it with, I suppose the analogy is the face-to-face space, I guess. I mean, if you think about the face-to-face space, there are a range of you think about them as products, programs available from a massive variety of global universities, from the very top to less well-known brands who are still provide a good quality education, all the way through to universities that perhaps aren't of the right sort of quality. So there's a lot of face-to-face offerings in the market, and those are differentiated by price. I suspect that will happen, or that is happening in exactly the same way in the online space. So if you want an MBA from London Business School, or from Harvard, or from Tuck, then you have to pay for it. And you pay a lot for it. And what you're paying for is the brand, as well as, of course, I wouldn't deny it's a really good quality education, but you pay a serious amount of money for that. And there's only a small percentage of the marketplace can afford that. And I suspect the same will happen with online. So a big part of what we have to do is get our price right for the right student, for the right quality, and for our own particular brand positioning in the short term. And that's a big part of our discussion as to where we set the price for it. So I would just say it will differentiate the market. Some people may be able to afford to go to those online programs at the very top brands and the very top schools. I would argue, having seen those, and you know, I went to Oxford myself, my first degree. I would argue that you say, well, what exactly is it you're paying all of that top dollar for? And is it really that much better than something you can get from a university which has a good brand, has a growing reputation, knows how to treat its students well, will give you a high quality of education, and you can do it for a fifth or a tenth of the price. So I think the market itself will decide as to whether the price is right for the product that it gets in. That's how markets function. The key challenge. So yes, you're right. I was there for I think 8 years in the end. And I evolved my role while I was there. So for the last 5 years, I was in the CEO position. I also evolved to being VP of Innovation for a year. So what were the key challenges? Well, we had a very particular challenge in the UK, because bear in mind, Laureate is a very large organisation, educational company. A lot of what it does is, as you're aware, look for and run universities around the world and bring a rigour to their business, if you like. The online space was actually, because the contracts are now terminated, in the UK, quite a different sort of arrangement with the two UK partners. So the learning was back a little bit, I think, to what I was saying about sort of stability versus innovation. For Laureate, the partnerships with the UK universities was a very different sort of business, and I think some of my American colleagues, much as I love them, I think they occasionally forgot that they couldn't just run the University of Liverpool's online programs and the University of Roehampton's online programs, that are actually working in a partnership where the universities fundamentally retained the ultimate decision over how those programs were run, was a very long and sometimes hard-learned lesson. And I don't think that ever really got to the point where people kind of understood that out with the people like myself who were actually involved in running those partnerships for Laureate. There's a very particular way that universities operate, and that the difference in the speed, the culture, the orientation from a large American for-profit university and a public UK-based university, you can imagine a lot of friction between the two. So part of the job of running those partnerships was to kind of reduce that friction, really to get under the skin of the UK university, understand how they operate, what their demands were, how they choose to function, the limitations of how they function, and to build a relationship that worked with those limitations to achieve a successful result. So that was a very key learning process for me, and I think my role was often the interface between the larger American organization based in Baltimore and the running of the partnership based in the UK, and that I found that in times really frustrating, but an incredible challenge. And I came out of it with some excellent friends in both in the US and in Europe, actually. So it was sometimes fraught, but that I think for anyone who's, you know, if you're sitting for example, in an OPM and you're looking at a university, you will probably, I suspect, often have worked in a university, because there's a lot of movement between OPMs and universities. So I wouldn't underestimate the value of knowing how universities function, what the limitations are on how they function, all of the bureaucracy that goes with working with the university, even the best ones, and making sure that you think really, really carefully about how you accommodate and work with those vagaries, if you like, of the university sector. And that way you get I think a very good understanding and a very good long-term relationship. And I think perhaps the other thing about it is, as you're looking at those partnerships, thinking about how you set up a genuine shared risk and shared return, which drives that partnership, so your incentives are fully aligned. Now, that's just about good long-term partnerships, actually, but so important in this space to make sure that you both fully understand what it is that you're doing as a result of this partnership, that you both fully appreciate the objectives of each other, because the objectives are never completely the same, but you do get what the OPM's doing as a university and vice versa. and make sure that you build that into the foundation of the partnership. And that's the work that I've been doing over the last 12 months or so, really, to set up our own online stuff here. So I'm hoping it's going to be a success. There will be many bumps along the road. There's no doubt about it. There always is. But having those and that kind of understanding of those differences and similarities between the two, I think, is a hugely important piece of the success of these things. So in terms of setting them up, the key challenge, and it's kind of a little bit of what I was talking about as a university, is that I think in a university, and I have it even here now with, you have faculty who become very engaged in their subject, and they think that they want to launch a program, a master's program in their area of expertise, and they consider it a success if they get 10 students on it. And it's getting the balance right between bringing your faculty with you, who have got that energy and that passion for their subject, and bringing in that capability of being able to assess a global market, understand what the actual demand is for a program, and putting those two things together, because they don't always sit together. So that's a very interesting process to have to go through, and it requires continual work. So when I was at Laureate, we saw it all the time. So, Laureate would not look at a program that wasn't generating, 250, 300 students after a couple of years from launch. More, that's an absolute minimum. For many members of the faculty at the university, they would look at that and say, how on earth can I manage a program? Can we run a program with that many students on it? So there's often this, you start from this very large disparity between what success looks like for an online program and what a member of faculty thinks that success looks like in their particular area. And kind of bringing those two together and having them understand each other and get to a common solution is a process that we're actually embarked on as I speak. And actually, again, just coming back to this sort of, how do you make sure that all of the incentives line up between the university, often represented by program leader, and the OPM, such that you're all looking at the same common objectives for delivery. And that's a really interesting challenge. Yeah, to some extent, Divyanshu, I don't think you can teach programs in management. One of the things we do at Lincoln is it's an applied approach anyway. So, particularly in the business school, I think this is true of all good business schools, is that you can't just teach programs in a theoretical way anymore, and that depends on your faculty ability. It depends on your content. It depends on giving exposure to practitioners, etc. And those things are the same online as they are face to face. However, it does come back a little bit, I think, to your question about the career transition, because I think people study online for slightly different reasons. It's a huge simplification, but just to kind of generalize for a second, study online probably for slightly different reasons that they might do a face-to-face program, because precisely if they're doing face-to-face masters, it might be a transition to a first career even, or potentially a transition to another career. Whereas online, you are already potentially usually already working. So the need to be exposed to business, to business practice is slightly less, because you're kind of exposed to it every day. Whereas if you're studying face to face, perhaps on a full-time program, you might not necessarily have had that exposure if you're coming straight from an undergraduate program, or you might not have it available to you because you're in a classroom. So I think that the need is a slightly different one on the online programs. That is not at all to say that we wouldn't bring in cases, that we wouldn't bring in practitioners, but probably in terms of your program design, you may put slightly less emphasis on the requirement to do that as you would do in a face-to-face program, if that makes sense. Indeed, Divyanshu, it's an essential design criterion, in fact, for your online program. Excuse me. And so I think the only time that becomes a problem is if your assumption is that the pedagogy is you go in and you learn stuff from the content, and then you reproduce that content for your assessment. In other words, that's the limit of your learning. And I've oversimplified just to make the point. If your design is such that whatever the content is that you design, and the content will be really good, is really just the start point from the learning process, and that you allow the students to go on a voyage of discovery in a way which is sort of based around critical action learning methodology, then the student, him or herself, is creating their own learning experience, and that's a very easy it's a very effective way, I should say, of designing in the challenge to meet the challenge that you've just presented. So, to take an example, studying HR, which is my subject, if you're in a business in India or a business in China or a business in Africa, you can still get an extremely good learning process, which is facilitated by the tutor, which has a start point of some content, which develops some base theoretical ideas on the subject. But the end point is unique to you and to your particular circumstances in whichever area of the world you happen to be in and whichever business you happen to be in. And I'll give an example at the moment. I'm running a blended on MBA. I've just taught the first module on it, which is on leading and developing people. And now it's a regional program, so all of the participants are UK based. However, one very big part of that conversation is between those who are based in a public sector organisation and those who are based in private sector organisations. So even in the UK, even in this region, they're coming at it, the subject matter, with very, very different perspectives. And that's created a very healthy and a very interesting discussion in the classroom because we're using a critical action learning process. So they get an enormous amount out. And a lot of the learning, of course, particularly at master's level and particularly with working professionals, is done through the discussion and through the interaction between other people who are on a similar learning journey. And that's an extremely effective way of learning. So it's a very good question, Divyanshu, but I think we've developed over experience of being able to create an environment that anyone, wherever you are in the world, can benefit from in a unique way. Yeah, it'll be. I have my favourites based on experience, but actually we're in the design process right now. What I think we will end up with is certainly to start with, it will be a discussion-based pedagogy. The key criterion is to make sure that discussion is done in a way which is flexible to accommodate time zones all around the world, which means that students have to have enough chronological time to run an effective discussion over a set number of days, given the module or the particular question that they may be discussing at a given time. And also in terms of the particular events in that discussion have to be done so in the right sort of way. So if it's an asynchronous discussion, relatively easy to do because you can run that discussion over a period of time. It's not time-based. And one of the great advantages of the asynchronous discussion thread is precisely that you can contribute to it whenever you wish. It often breaks down cultural norms because from certain cultures where contributing to a discussion in a classroom may not be a cultural norm for you, they find it easier to do. It overcomes language barriers potentially because you have time to reflect on your contribution. So the asynchronous thread is for me a very powerful means of engaging students in that learning process. However, there's also a role, I think, for synchronous discussions. Technology now is much better than it used to be even 5-10 years ago. For running that. It's more reliable. People have much more bandwidth now than they used to have. It used to be a point, and this shows my longevity in online programs. There was a time when we had to allow for the fact that people simply didn't have in their part of the world the right bandwidth to be able to run something like a synchronous conversation, and that's where the asynchronous discussion was essential, really. But that's much less of a limitation now. So synchronous conversations, however, there is a role for them, but they do need to be done in a way that allows for time zones. So generally, if you have one synchronous session and you're running a global program, it needs to be run 2 or maybe 3 times over a given time zone such that they can have the opportunity to dial in directly to it. What you also need to do, which is essential, is of course to record those discussions, put them in the classroom. So if for whatever reason you've missed it, you get the chance to catch up afterwards. So those are probably some of the considerations. They're not the only ones, but those are some of the core considerations in design for an online experience. There are a couple that I think are really, really out there, actually, Divyanshu. And by the way, it's interesting. One of my favorite expressions is that there's no new ideas under the sun; they're just unevenly distributed. And I've got, and I'm at the sort of the wrong end of the age spectrum, really, to be and I'm not a technologist. However, when we look at the gaming world, where you now have this incredibly immersive experience in the game experience, incredibly interactive. I think there are now many opportunities for us to learn in the educational space, and they are being learned actually in the gaming world, to create virtual environments where you can really be there. And particularly in, for example, what should I say? Let's say you're teaching online students, or the learning objective is to learn laboratory procedures. It's very easy now to create a simulated laboratory environment where they can learn all of the safety mechanisms for working in a laboratory without ever having to risk being in a real laboratory. I've seen good online environments for teaching firefighters where they never have to risk injury because it's all done online. The military are using an awful lot now, have been for decades actually, using online simulations, of course, for military training, something that happens just down the road here at RAF Cranwell. So I think there's a massive opportunity now for us in the educational sphere to learn from and adapt and incorporate that kind of, that virtual environment. There's a business school in France that I've been talking to recently who are using augmented reality with their students. So it's a face-to-face class, but they give them a headset which fits onto their iPhone, so they use an app, and it allows them on a logistics class to walk around a clean factory, which they would never be able to do in practice, or would be really difficult, large numbers of students, and almost have a virtual case where they're studying how that factory operates, and they can interview people in the factory, they can engage with them, they can engage with each other, and then bring that learning back into the classroom and talk about what it is that they've discovered. Those are just fantastic opportunities now to bring technology into our educational experience. And I think we'll just see an explosion of those sorts of things as technology gets cheaper, as it becomes more available, as people become more accessed to that technology. That's just such a really exciting area over the next 5 to 10 years, I would say. Probably more mainstream, I would like to think. I mean, you and I have been talking for a while, Divyanshu, about online, the developing market in India for online. I think there's still some cultural norms in certain parts of the world that say that the only good education is a face-to-face education. I think we'll see in the next 10 years that really getting less. I think it'll still be there in certain parts of the world, but I think the perception that still is out there occasionally of online education being somehow inferior to face-to-face education. You mentioned some of the top schools now getting into the online space, so that's clearly going to drive quality and standards in online education. But I think people will just see online as in the same way as face-to-face, with a broad range of offers, a broad range of selections, with some really good quality, some less good quality. There won't just be this generic perception anymore that by definition, if you're studying online, it's going to be an inferior experience to face-to-face. I think in certain cases, online will provide a much better experience. There will still be, by the way, a room for both. And I think one of the things we're starting to see is, particularly some of these virtual experiences we're talking about, is almost like the two starting to merge in some ways, and the face-to-face experience becomes an online experience through the use of technology. So, and that will help to break down some of these misperceptions about quality. So I think that's probably a shift that we'll start to see happening over the next 10 years. It's happening already, but I think we'll see more of that over the next 10 years.